The sound of the old clock seemed to chew through the silence of the room, second by second. The varnish on the jacaranda table reflected the family portraits, all in black and white, lined up like witnesses who don't blink. The smell of wax, mothballs, and a lingering trace of my father's cologne clung to the wood and the air. I stood with my back to the window, letting the light hit my face. I needed them to see me whole when they got to the part with my name. The lawyer smoothed the pages as if stroking a nervous animal. My brother leaned back, a smile that didn't suit mourning on his face, and crossed his legs, showing off his new shoes. My sister-in-law placed her white hand on his knee, a ring flashing. My aunts and uncles whispered with church service eyes. My mother wrung a faded handkerchief, the same one from every farewell. As per Mr. Adalberto's last will and testament, the lawyer said, his voice velvety, the assets are designated as follows. The rest became noise until I heard the sentence that split the air. To the daughter, the old family house, with all its contents and land. To the son, the entirety of the shares of the company Adalberto and Sons. The word sons stung. It always had. The room breathed in a unison that reminded me of a rising tide. My brother didn't wait a second. He let out a short laugh, the kind you hear from someone who just won a pickup game on an empty court. Well, sis, you got the dust and the memories. I got the stuff that's actual work. He tapped his own chest theatrically. It's a matter of calling, isn't it? Some are born for business, others for restoring rugs. My sister-in-law chuckled softly. But the house is lovely vintage, she said, stretching the word out like snapping a rubber band. I breathed through my nose. I could taste the rust of unspoken things on my tongue. An inheritance of silence I learned early, at dinners where I was the girl with strong opinions, and he was the boy with leadership potential. The walls watched. The ceiling fan spun without a breeze, just noise. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued reading clauses, deadlines, taxes. My mother's handkerchief stopped twisting. My sister-in-law's ring clinked against her water glass. Someone commented on following the father's wishes, and another said, "It's only natural." Natural. In our family, that word had always been the makeup for injustice. When the reading was over, my brother stood up with that whistle he's used since he was a teenager, as if his own mouth were applauding. "Look, darling, no hard feelings," he said, leaning over me, his cologne cold. "But business requires instinct, responsibility. You have good taste, no doubt. You'll have fun cataloging grandma's trinkets. The company. Leave it to someone who understands. After all, it's Adalberto and Sons, right? It's been written since we were born." The blade of the word struck again. Sons. I smiled, a small page-marking smile. "Funny," I replied. "The headquarters was built on the house's land. One's foundation is the other's floor." He blinked, impatient. "Metaphors don't pay the employees." He tightened the knot of his tie. "See you at the new branch opening if you're not too busy with termites." The group began to rise, chairs scraping, whispers like notes of pity. "She's sensitive. It's better this way. Everyone in their place." My sister-in-law adjusted her blazer, touching my shoulder in a gesture that was meant to be affectionate but sounded like a warning. "If you need help getting rid of the old things, we know people who buy." My mother gave me a quick look, love and fear sharing the same eye, and followed in her son's wake. I was the last one left, alone with the lawyer. He closed his briefcase carefully, like someone closing a piano. He didn't offer condolences, didn't mention God. He just aligned the paper, took a quiet breath, and broke the protocol of a man who lives by fine print. "Ma'am." His voice came from the place where truth resides. "I think there's something your father didn't tell anyone." The room seemed to shrink. The portraits to move closer. Clock to tick faster. I didn't move. "What?" I asked, foregoing my usual elegance. He glanced at the door, making sure we were truly alone, then slid a brown envelope toward me. In the corner, I recognized my father's handwriting, hard as a fence post. My full name, underlined twice. The lawyer touched the paper with his fingertips, as if pointing to a destination on an old map. "Open it at the house," he said. "In the place where the wind hits first." And he smiled in the rarest of ways. The smile of someone who knows that dust can hide gold. The house was waiting for me like an old dog, quiet, faithful, and covered in dust. The windows were stuck, the curtains smelled of time, and the floorboards creaked as if complaining of my absence. I entered slowly, feeling the still air move around me, as if every inch recognized me. The door closed behind me with a dry click. It was strange. From the outside the house looked small, but inside it was a labyrinth of echoes. The sound of the wind came through a crack and slammed a door in the back. "In the place where the wind hits first." The lawyer's words echoed in my head. I walked toward the sound, my hand trailing along the peeling wallpaper. The hallway led to my father's old office, a room I hadn't entered since I was a child. The door was ajar, and a draft was coming from the open balcony window. This was the place. The envelope felt heavy in my hands. I opened it carefully. Inside there wasn't a letter. There was an old cassette tape, a small rusty key, and a diary with a worn leather cover. My father's diary. My heart pounded. I sat in his old armchair, the leather cool against my skin, and opened the diary to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were firm. "She will think I have abandoned her. She will think I preferred the sun, the name, the tradition. But a name is just a roof. The foundation is what matters. The key opens the cellar. The tape tells the truth. The rest is in her hands. She is smarter than all of us. She just never had the chance to be ruthless." The cellar. I remembered it vaguely, a dark, damp place my brother and I were forbidden to enter. I took the key, its cold metal a strange comfort, and went down the creaking stairs. The air was thick with the smell of earth and secrets. The key fit the old lock perfectly. Inside, under a dusty tarp, was a small safe. It opened with a click. And there, neatly organized, were documents, contracts, and financial statements that told a different story. My father, years before his death, had been systematically siphoning funds from the company. But not for himself. He was investing them under a separate legal entity, tied to a single asset. The land the house was on. The land I had just inherited. The documents were clear. My brother had inherited a company built on a foundation that wasn't his. He had the brand, the name, the facade. I had the ground beneath it. I went back upstairs, my mind racing. I found an old tape player in the study and put the cassette in. My father's voice, raspy and tired, filled the room. "Arilda, if you are hearing this, it means I am gone. And it means I was a coward. I let them call you difficult when you were just intelligent. I let them call him a leader when he was just privileged. I couldn't fight the world for you, so I gave you the ground to fight from. The company is a house of cards, my dear. And you own the table." The tape ended. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the dusty room, at the fading portraits, at the peeling paint. This wasn't a ruin. It was an arsenal. I sat there for a long time, the weight of 20 years of misunderstanding settling around me. The dust, the memories, the old house, they weren't my inheritance. They were my power. My brother had taken the fruits, but he had forgotten about the roots. And I was standing right on top of them. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever been given the scraps while someone else took the feast, then you know this feeling. The quiet, slow-burning fire of a truth waiting for its moment. Subscribe, because this is just the beginning. I spent the next few days in the old house, a ghost in my own history. I didn't clean, I excavated. Every drawer I opened, every box I untied, was a piece of a puzzle my father had left for me. I found old photographs, letters, and business records he had hidden away, each one a breadcrumb on the path to a truth he was too afraid to speak aloud. I found the original blueprints for the company headquarters. My name was on them next to his. I had been the one, as a young architecture student, who had designed the layout, who had solved the structural problems. A contribution he had publicly credited to a team of consultants. I found the minutes from board meetings where my brother's bold initiatives were approved, initiatives funded by the very money my father was diverting. Each success of his was underwritten by a secret I was now uncovering. The taste in my mouth was a bitter mix of vindication and sorrow. This wasn't just about money or a company. It was about a lifetime of being edited out of my own story. I remembered the family gatherings when my brother, now a grown man, would speak with that tone of someone laying down laws. I, the architect who made pretty designs, was always treated as the ornament, never the structure. How many times had he worn the same smile I saw today, the one the world always found so confident? The smile born of the privilege of never having to prove you deserved to be at the table. I took an old glass from the cabinet, poured myself some wine I found in the crystal cabinet. The taste was dry, but sweet enough to remind me of a distant victory. I walked to the large mirror in the hallway. The reflected image seemed like someone else. Hair up, blouse wrinkled, eyes lit. For a moment, I saw in them the woman he had always feared, the one who doesn't need to raise her voice to have power. I went back to the table and began to organize everything in chronological order. The contracts, the notes, the copies of checks, and the original plans for the company. Everything my father mentioned was there. And the most symbolic detail. In almost every document, there was a clause referring to the matrix property, the land of the house. The physical and legal basis on which my brother's empire was built. As I was taking notes, the phone vibrated on the table. It was him. I took a deep breath before answering. "So, sis? Getting used to the smell of mold?" His voice was teasing, but with a trace of impatience. "Trying," I replied dryly. "And you, handling the inheritance well?" "Oh, inheritance is for those who know how to multiply, right? You always lacked that instinct. But I want to be generous. If you want to sell the house, I can make you a fair offer. Let's say, a sentimental one." "Fair for whom?" I asked. He laughed. "For everyone. You get rid of the burden, and I expand the company headquarters. Do you really think you can maintain that house alone?" I closed my eyes for a moment. I saw the image of him, the expensive suit, the polished smile, the hands that inherited our father's power but none of his responsibilities. I breathed slowly. "You know what's funny, brother?" said calmly. "The foundations of your company are literally mine." "What are you insinuating?" His voice grew tense. "Nothing that time won't confirm." Hung up. The wine was forgotten. I sat down again, and the sound of the wind seemed stronger, as if the house approved. I picked up my father's diary and read another passage. "They will always see your intelligence as a threat. That's why I hid in your hands what the world will call luck, but what is, in fact, justice." Stop. Justice. The word felt different now. This wasn't about revenge or getting even. It was about reparation, the kind of settlement that doesn't require shouting, only precision. I spent hours mapping out the documents, digitizing everything on my laptop. With each new saved file, I felt the old fear dissolve. And in its place, something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. In the middle of the night, a noise at the window made me get up. A branch tapping, perhaps. But there was something more. A shadow across the street. Someone watching. The reflection from the streetlight revealed a familiar silhouette. My brother. I stood there watching him watch me. He thought I didn't have the courage. That I would be, as always, the sensitive sister. I turned on all the lights in the house. One by one. The glare cut through the windows, bathed the garden, illuminated his face out there. I saw him look away and get into his car. Only then did I breathe. I went back to the table. The tape was still there. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the roughness of the old plastic. A reminder. Time keeps what needs to be heard. I picked up the diary, read the last written sentence again. "Whoever builds the ground never falls." Smiled. The house might be old, but the foundation was mine. And deep down I knew. Whoever inherits the ground inherits the power. Sometimes the greatest strength is not to respond. Silence is the brick that holds back revenge until the right moment arrives. And when it does, no one builds on ruins again. The morning dawned heavy. The kind of day where the light seems to measure distance before entering. I stood for a while on the porch, looking at the dry garden that time had forgotten. The dead flowers still held the shape of when they were alive, and I thought, maybe beauty is also a form of resistance. The phone rang again. It was my mother. "Your voice sounds different," she said, her tone a mix of care and fear. "Your brother came by last night, furious. He said you threatened him." I let out a short laugh. "He's confusing facts with threats, Mom. He's always done that. Arilda, please don't cause trouble. Your father just passed away. The family needs peace." "Peace for whom?" "Yes. Because for some, peace has always meant silence." She took a deep breath. "You've always been resentful. Your brother just wants what's best for everyone." "What's best for him, you mean?" My voice came out cold, firm. "I was never part of everyone, Mom." On the other side, silence. The kind of silence that cuts. I knew what was coming next. "He's a man, Arilda. It's his name that supports the company. The world is what it is." That sentence pierced me like hot iron. I had heard it so many times I could recite it. The world is what it is. As if that were justification for any injustice. I hung up before hearing the rest. I felt my heart tighten, but my body was calm. Sometimes old pain returns not to hurt, but to remind you why you don't give up. I spent the rest of the morning examining the contracts. The evidence I had kept in the safe, the bank statements, the digitized tapes. Everything told the same story. A man who inherited power and spent it as if it were limitless. And another man, my father, who regretted it too late. I stopped in front of the living room mirror and saw myself differently. It wasn't pride, it was something else. Lucidity. I knew what I had to do. I just didn't know how much it would cost. That night, I sat at the same table where, years ago, the family's decisions were made. I was always the one who served the coffee, never the one who spoke. I remember the stifled laughter when I presented my ideas. "Arilda, that's too bold," my father would say, with that sweet tone of someone who thinks he's teaching. "You need to be more discreet." Discreet. That word had haunted me my whole life. Now it was my weapon. I opened my laptop, organized the documents into folders, and prepared a complete dossier with every piece of evidence of my brother's fraud. The contracts, the audio, the forged signatures. I wasn't going to go to him. I was going to let him trip over his own echo. As I attached the files, something in me broke for good. Not fear, not love, naivete. I felt like crying, but I didn't. In place of tears, a memory came. Me and him, still children in the backyard. He would climb on our father's back, pretending to drive an imaginary car, while I swept the leaves. He would say, "Driving is for those with a future." I would reply, "And clearing the path is for those who don't want to fall." I smiled to myself. I had always cleared the path. He just didn't realize it was the same one I would make him stumble on. I picked up my phone and recorded a short audio message, which I sent to my father's lawyer. "Doctor, I found something you need to see. They are documents signed before the final will. I would like to talk in person. But please, with discretion." I sent it. And before turning off the device, I opened the old photo gallery. There it was. The image from the day the company inaugurated its first building. My father and my brother in front, smiling, and me in the background, in a white dress, cut off by the framing. It hurt me, but it also fueled me. I zoomed in on the photo. In the bottom corner, the reflection in the mirrored sign showed the company's full name. Adalberto and Sons, founded on the land of the Santos family. My surname. The one that was always hidden behind my father's name. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair. The house was silent, but not empty. Seemed to be watching. It seemed to understand. If you've ever felt the weight of being the one left with the rest, but held within you the foundation that supports everything, you understand me. Injustice teaches. And one day, silence collects its due. Write in the comments if you've ever had to reinvent yourself to prove you were more than they expected. Before going to sleep, I left the folder with the documents on the table, in plain sight. The moon shone through the window and illuminated my father's name engraved on the diary cover. I touched the letters with my fingertips and whispered, "Dad, your regret will become my proof." Outside, the wind began to blow again, and for the first time it sounded like applause. The cafe chosen by the lawyer was small, discreet, and a little out of the way, the kind of place no one enters without a reason. I arrived early. The aroma of roasted beans mixed with the smell of rain that was beginning to fall. I ordered a black coffee and sat near the window. The cup trembled slightly between my fingers, but not from fear, from anticipation. When he arrived, he had the same expression of someone who has been carrying a secret for too long. His suit was a bit wrinkled, his face tired, and his eyes said more than words. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Arilda." He sat down without rushing, placing his briefcase on the table. "I imagined you would eventually find what your father left." I nodded in silence. He opened the briefcase and took out an envelope with an old seal. "The will your brother heard is not the only one. There was a previous version. Mr. Adalberto made changes in his last months, but let's just say not all of them were registered at the main notary's office." My heart sped up. "And what does that mean?" "It means your father entrusted the most important part to someone he thought his son would never look for." The lawyer lowered his tone. "You." He opened the envelope and took out a yellowed sheet, with the letterhead of my father's law firm. The words were clear: partial transfer of the majority shares of the company Adalberto and Sons, secured under the Matrix Property Clause. "Matrix Property," I read aloud, unable to contain my astonishment. "The land where the house is," he explained. "The entire industrial complex, all the administrative buildings, were built on it. Legally, nothing could function without the right to use the land." A shiver ran down my spine. The memory of my brother's laughter during the will reading came back like a dry punch. Him mocking, saying I was left with the dust and the memories. Little did he know he had been left with the foundation. "Literally," the lawyer continued, "your father didn't have the courage to face the prejudice, not even within his own home. But he left the board set. You have documents that prove the transfer. If you validate this, your brother could lose control of the company." I was silent for a while. Outside, the raindrops hit the windowpane like a countdown. "He'll fight," I said. "And he'll make it look like I'm the one lying." "I know," the lawyer replied firmly. "But truth has a strength that power doesn't understand." I took the paper in my hands. My father's handwriting seemed firmer than ever. It was as if, even after death, he was still offering me something. Not just justice but courage. "Doctor," I asked, "why are you telling me this now?" He took a deep breath before answering. "Because your father left me one last instruction. When she discovers what is hers, tell her it was never a gift. It was reparation." Those words pierced me with force. Reparation. That was the true name of my inheritance. The lawyer closed his briefcase, looked out the window, and said, "Your brother won't accept it. He'll try to intimidate you. But now you know. He built his empire on your ground." We sat in silence. Only the sound of the rain filled the space between the sentences. I paid for the coffee, put the envelope in my purse, and stood up. Outside, the sky was gray, heavy. The wind made the leaves dance in spirals, and I had the feeling that the whole city was watching me. I took a few steps and felt the familiar click, the sound of a car braking slowly behind me. I looked at the reflection in the shop window. My brother's black SUV. He was in the driver's seat, his face half hidden behind dark glasses, but I would recognize that look anywhere. A look that mixes contempt and fear. He lowered the window, faking a smile. "A little coffee, sis? What a coincidence to run into you here." I didn't answer. I kept walking, and he followed in the car at a low speed. "Dad's lawyer was really a trustworthy man, wasn't he?" he said, his tone dripping with irony. "A shame not everyone knows how to keep a secret." I stopped walking and looked directly at him. The reflection of my image appeared on the wet glass, me standing firm, briefcase in hand. The problem with secrets, I said calmly, is that when they change owners, they change power too. He narrowed his eyes, his smile fading. You don't know who you're dealing with. I do, I replied. Someone who never understood foundations. And I turned my back, letting the sound of the engine echo behind me. When I reached the corner, the wind blew hard, pushing the rain against my face. I smiled to myself. That cold water felt like a baptism for the new phase of the story. The phase where silence ceased to be a shield and became a sword. Some heirs believe power lies in the papers they sign. Others discover that true power lies in the roots of what was forgotten. If you've ever felt that what was yours was taken, but the foundation was left in your hands, stay, because that's where justice begins to rise. I returned home before sunset. The sky was an almost violent red, as if the whole day had been burning from the inside, and now only the embers remained. I entered and locked the door behind me. The silence of the house no longer scared me. It was as if it were listening to me. I took the envelope out of my purse and placed it on the table. The old paper seemed to breathe with me. I picked up the coffee cup I had forgotten in the morning and took a cold, bitter sip. That was the taste of truth. Nothing sweet, but impossible to deny. I turned on the computer. There were dozens of unread emails. Messages from the office, from my mother, and from my brother, all with the same subject. We need to talk. I deleted them without opening. He was used to being heard. This time he would be the one to listen. I spent hours calmly analyzing the documents, cross-referencing dates, comparing signatures, enlarging authentication seals. Every detail confirmed the same thing. The company's foundation was on the land my father had left me. And without that land, everything my brother had legally built would collapse. I picked up my father's diary again. The pages smelled of tobacco and old ink. In the corner of one of them, there was a sentence underlined in blue pen. The value of a name lies in what it supports in silence. I closed the diary and felt the tears come, but this time they were not of pain. They were of recognition. I had spent my life trying to prove my worth out loud, when what supported me had been quiet all along. I opened a new folder on the computer and wrote the title, Roots. Inside, I began to assemble a complete dossier. Photos of the documents, digitized excerpts, recordings of my father's tape, and a timeline explaining everything. A file not just for me but for the world. The sound of a loud knock on the door interrupted the silence. 3 sharp, impatient knocks. My heart raced, but not with fear. I picked up my phone and turned on the audio recorder before opening. My brother was there, soaked from the rain, his suit clinging to his body and his eyes inflamed. So this is it, he said without greeting. You're going to try to steal what's mine. I crossed my arms. Funny. What's yours was built on what's mine. He took a step forward, but I stopped him with a look. The difference between us was never in the volume of our voices, but in the firmness of our silence. Do you think Dad wanted this? He shouted. A war. He wanted justice, I replied. But he didn't have the courage. I do. The anger in his face transformed into something deeper, fear. I have connections, Arilda. I can make any paper disappear. Smiled. And I have the wind, brother. He frowned. The wind? Yes, the same one that hit first. The one that spreads what needs to be heard. He looked around, confused. And it was in that moment that he noticed the open laptop on the table, the microphone on, the sound of the recording running. You're recording. He took a step forward. Have you gone mad? No, I pressed the enter key. I've learned. The automatic transmission sent the file to the lawyer, to the group of ex-employees who had been unjustly fired, and to a local reporter who covered corporate inheritance cases. My brother turned pale. You wouldn't do that. I already did. The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, thunder split the sky in two. Inside, only the sound of the wind passing through the cracks, the same wind that seemed to repeat my father's name. He looked at me one last time, and for an instant I saw the boy he once was, the spoiled, self-assured boy who believed the world would always be on his side. "You'll regret this," he said softly. "Maybe. But regret never killed anyone. Fear, on the other hand, has." He left, slamming the door hard. The whole house shook, but it remained standing like me. I sat at the table and watched the sending bar complete in the email. 100%. The Roots dossier was delivered. I picked up my father's diary and wrote on the final pages, just below his last sentence, "The wind doesn't destroy what is solid. It only reveals where the dust is hiding." Closed the book slowly. Outside, the sound of the rain was transforming into something almost musical. There are silences that are not cowardly. They are strategic. They are the ones that prepare the sound of truth when it finally decides to speak. And when it speaks, there is no one who can silence it. The next day, the news was already spreading. Not in the major newspapers, not yet, but in the right circles. A local reporter had published an article titled, "The Foundation House, the Forgotten Land That Sustains an Empire." The text spoke of an investigation into irregularities at Adalberto and Sons, mentioning documents found by a legitimate heir. No names cited. But it was enough for the buzz to begin. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. I turned them all off. I wanted silence, and silence now obeyed me. The house was more alive than ever. The wind swept through the rooms as if it were clearing out decades of dirt. With every step, I felt the firm ground under my feet, the same ground that now supported a truth that no one could deny. As I was reviewing the files, I received a message from the lawyer. "Congratulations, Arilda. The company's board has called an emergency meeting. Your brother is not doing well." I took a deep breath. My hands trembled a little, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what I was about to do. I picked up my father's diary, the envelope, and the authenticated copy of the documents. I put everything in a black briefcase and dressed calmly. The same suit I wore to my college graduation, the one my mother said didn't suit my skin. I looked in the mirror. The color of the fabric, ivory, contrasted with my skin in a way that I used to think was too much. Now I thought it was perfect. The beauty that once bothered was the same that sustained my presence. I picked up my phone and opened the recorder. If you have ever been erased from a story you helped build, share this moment with me. Because today it's not about revenge. It's about justice. That was my call to action, spoken like a confession. I wasn't asking for support. I was summoning witnesses. I got in the car and drove to the company headquarters. The tall, mirrored building reflected the overcast sky, as if holding a storm inside. I parked in the main lot and walked to the entrance. Some employees stopped to look at me. I recognized a few faces. Secretaries, engineers, technicians. The same ones who, years ago, would avert their eyes when I passed through the hallways. Now they looked straight, some with respect, others with fear. At the reception, the young woman at the desk widened her eyes. "Mrs. Arilda, I didn't know you were coming." "Neither did I. But sometimes, you only discover your own place when you step where they told you you shouldn't." I went up. On the executive floor, the silence was thick. The glass doors showed my brother pacing back and forth, talking on the phone with harsh gestures. When he saw me, he froze. "What do you think you're doing here?" he asked without letting go of the phone. "What I've always done. Building what you tried to destroy." I placed the briefcase on the table. The sound of the impact echoed through the room. "What is this?" he asked, irritated. "The foundations. Literally and figuratively." He opened the papers, his eyes running over the lines, his face losing color with each paragraph. "You leaked this to the press," he shouted. "I don't leak. I illuminate." He tried to laugh, but the laugh died halfway. Outside, the board members began to arrive. Serious faces, expensive suits, measured steps. My father's lawyer was also among them. My brother still tried to regain control, adjusting his tie. "You don't understand what you're doing. If you bring down the company, you lose too." "I'm not bringing it down." I looked him in the eye. "I'm just going to rebuild it with those who have always been in the shadows." The lawyer approached firmly. Mr. Adalberto Jr., we need to talk in private. There are serious irregularities in the property records. He shot me a look of hatred. You've destroyed the family, Arilda. No. I just stopped sweeping the dirt under the rug. The board members closed the door behind them. I stayed outside, watching through the frosted glass the moving silhouettes, the tense gestures, his head slowly lowering. Suddenly, the thunder outside boomed loudly. The rain poured down on the windows, and for a moment, the sound muffled all the voices. It was as if all of nature was washing the building's facade. I sat on the bench in the hallway. My breathing was calm, my body firm. The wind again swept through the hallway and blew under the boardroom door. And then I knew, his empire ended there. There are truths that don't need screams, only witnesses. When the courage of a black woman occupies the space they tried to deny, the world has to bow and listen to the sound of reparation. The meeting lasted for over 2 hours. I sat in the hallway, watching the reflection of the storm run down the glass, turning the building into a liquid mirror. No one came out, no one went in. Just the muffled sound of raised voices, slamming doors, and the constant noise of the rain. A perfect soundtrack for the end of an empire. When the door finally opened, the lawyer came out first. His face was serious, but with a restrained glint in his eyes. He looked at me and gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but enough. Right behind him came 2 of the board members, whispering to each other, visibly uncomfortable. And finally my brother. He seemed smaller. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his gaze lost. For a moment I thought he would attack me with words. He was always good at that, but this time there was no voice. Only heavy breathing. "Congratulations, sister," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "You got what you wanted." I looked at him calmly. "No, brother. I discovered. Time is what got what it wanted." He stared at me for a few seconds, trying to decipher what was in me. Anger, pride, pain, but he found nothing. I was whole and at peace. And that disarmed him more than any word. The lawyer approached. "Arilda, the board will open a formal audit. The company will go into receivership. But, most importantly, the documents prove that the Matrix land belongs exclusively to you. This changes everything." I nodded without euphoria. I already knew. "And the name?" he asked. "Does Adalberto and Sons continue?" He took a deep breath. "Not for long." My brother took a step forward. "This is a joke. The family name is what keeps the contracts, the investors, Dad's legacy." I looked at him and replied, "Dad's legacy is the ground you ignored. The name only looked good because it was standing on mine." The silence between us was broken by another clap of thunder. The rain was beating harder now, as if each drop were cleaning a little of the past. Suddenly, the lawyer's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, raised his eyebrows, and showed me the news. "Board of Adalberto and Sons suspends president after denunciation of irregularities." And just below, a smaller line. "Sources claim that the new legal representative is a woman." My brother turned pale. His mask, that trained expression of superiority, simply crumbled. "Do you think they'll respect you?" he said, trying to compose himself. "A woman. A black woman." I smiled slowly. "They don't have a choice. The ground they walk on now has my name on it." I walked out of the hallway without looking back. The sound of my footsteps echoed on the marble floors as if each step were signing a new chapter. At the reception I found the secretary, the same one who years ago would avoid saying good morning to me. She looked at me with a mixture of shame and admiration. "I always thought you should be here, Mrs. Arilda," she said softly. "But I never imagined it would be like this." I touched her shoulder gently. "Like this is how everything changes. Suddenly, what was unjust becomes unsustainable." Outside, the rain had already subsided. I walked to the car slowly. The cold wind passed by me like an old greeting, a touch of recognition. The city seemed different, or maybe it was me. In the rearview mirror, I saw my brother still at the company's door, standing, looking at me. For the first time I felt no pity, no anger. Felt distance. The distance of someone who finally understands that she no longer needs to prove anything. I got in the car and sat there for a moment, listening to the sound of the engine and the distant noise of drops falling from the roof. I picked up my phone, opened the recording I had made the night before, and listened to my own voice saying, "The wind doesn't destroy what is solid. It only reveals where the dust is hiding." Smiled. That was it. My father's house, the land, the documents, the words, the silence. It was all part of the same plan. Not mine but life's. I started the car and drove down the wet road, feeling the smell of earth and asphalt mix. With every kilometer, the past grew smaller in the mirror. There are victories that don't need applause. The sound of the rain washing away what was unjust is enough. Share if you have understood that dignity is an inheritance no one can take away. The next day, I woke up before the sun. The house was immersed in an almost sacred silence, the kind of silence that only comes after the storm. I went to the window. The sky was slowly clearing, tinting the clouds with gold. The smell of wet earth rose from the garden, mixed with the light perfume of the flowers that insisted on blooming in the cracks of the ground. I made coffee and sat on the porch, looking at the old gate still locked with the iron chain. I thought of how many times I had seen it closed, keeping the world out. And now, for the first time, I realized it wasn't a prison. It was protection. The house, the land, everything I had inherited without understanding, was just waiting for me to have the courage to occupy the space that was mine by right. The phone vibrated. It was a notification. The reporter's article had been republished by a national portal. The headline read, "Black woman discovers company was built on her family's land and takes legal control." Below, a photo of the mirrored building, reflecting the same sky I was seeing now. The messages started pouring in one after another. Ex-employees thanking me, women who said they saw themselves in my story, people telling their own stories of exclusion and resilience. I read each one calmly. None of them spoke of revenge. They all spoke of courage. I remembered my father's words recorded on the tape. What I did out of fear. And I smiled because now I knew what he meant. He was afraid of the world, but he left me the weapons to face it. Knowledge, patience, and the land. The ground that supports everything. I decided then to go to the old company office, now mine. I wore the same ivory suit and put my hair up in a low bun. I didn't need ostentation. The power that guided me came from tranquility. When I arrived, the atmosphere was different. The employees looked at me with a mixture of respect and curiosity. One of them, the youngest, opened the door for me and smiled. "Good morning, Dr. Arilda." The word doctor sounded different. Not as a title but as recognition. Entered. The air conditioning was blowing cold, but my body was warm, alive. I walked to the boardroom, now filled with boxes, contracts, and laptops. The board members were waiting for me. The lawyer greeted me with a slight nod. "Officially, you are the new legal representative for the properties and for the company's restructuring." Thanked him. I sat in the main chair, the one that had always belonged to my father, then to my brother. I touched the tabletop, remembering how many times I had served coffee there. And, in that simple gesture, I felt the circle close. "Before we talk about business," I began, "I want to make something clear. This company will no longer carry the name of someone who built on injustice." The silence was total. I looked around firmly. "The new name will be Roots. Because nothing grows without ground." Some board members exchanged looks, others nodded. The lawyer smiled discreetly. "Strong," he said. "And fair." I signed the first documents with a black ink pen, a firm stroke. The sound of the tip scratching the paper sounded like a foundation being laid. Each signature was a release, a cutting of old ties. As I read the final contract, a thought crossed my mind like lightning. The girl who was called stubborn, the woman who was excluded from photos, was now signing the reconstruction of everything. I stood there for a moment, breathing deeply. I remembered the day my brother called me decorative, laughing at the dress I wore to graduation. I remembered every look that diminished me, every silence that pushed me out. And I realized, none of it destroyed me, just built me differently. The morning light came through the window, illuminating the new name on the papers. Roots Incorporated. The wind swept through the hallway and blew the curtains as if the old house had sent its blessing. Some stories don't end, they transform. If you've ever had to be reborn from your own ruins, know this. Power is not in winning quickly, but in remaining firm until time recognizes your place. The following days were a whirlwind. Meetings, calls, suspended contracts, employees being relocated. And me at the center of it all, watching the empire reorganize. The company now had a different rhythm. The metallic noise of the industrial sector's machines mixed with the soft music coming from the newly renovated rooms. And for the first time, the sound of female voices echoed strongly in every hallway. I hired former female employees who had been fired without explanation. One of them, Lucia, hugged me when she returned. "I thought I would never set foot in here again," she said, her eyes welling up. "Thank you for remembering us." I replied with a short smile. "It's not remembrance, Lucia. It's reparation." In the midst of the organized chaos, I found a note left by the lawyer on my desk. "Process of transferring ownership of the land completed. Congratulations, Arilda. Now, officially, everything is under your name." I picked up the paper and stared at those words. Under your name. It was more than an achievement. It was an echo. A settling of accounts between what I was and what they had denied me from being. I went out to the glassed-in balcony that overlooked the company's courtyard. The ground outside was clean, freshly swept by the previous night's rain. I saw the employees crossing the courtyard, each at their own pace, some carrying clipboards, others toolboxes. None of them knew how much that ground meant to me. But I knew. And that was enough. I picked up my phone and found dozens of new messages. One of them was from my mother. "I heard about everything on TV. Your brother is devastated." But I confessed that for the first time I felt proud. "Your father would be too." I read the message in silence, letting the tears stream down slowly. They fell warm, but they didn't burn. There was no pain, only relief. I looked at the sky. The wind, once again, was blowing through the trees, swaying the branches and the power lines, as if the whole world were breathing with me. It was the same wind that had accompanied me from the beginning, the one that hit first. I went down to the parking lot and walked to the edge of the property. The damp earth, the stones, the old foundation marks. I touched the ground with my hands. "I'm back, Dad," I murmured. "And I've done what you didn't have the courage to do." The sound of the gate opening behind me made me turn. It was my brother. He was different, without the expensive suit, without the arrogant look. Just an ordinary beaten-down man. "I came to return this," he said, holding out a key. "For what?" I asked. "The house. I went there to get some of my things, but," he hesitated, "I couldn't go in." I took the key and observed him. For the first time there was no anger. Only distance and acceptance. "The house was never yours," I said. "But the memory is. Take what you need from it if it's to learn something." He nodded, his eyes welling up, and turned his back. I watched him walk away without resentment. He represented the past. And the past at last was leaving. When I got back to the building, a group of journalists was waiting at the entrance. Cameras, microphones, flashes. Someone asked, "Mrs. Arilda, what does this victory mean to you?" Smiled. The wind blew again, rustling the strands of my hair, and I replied, "It means the ground speaks. And when it speaks, even those who pretended not to hear have to listen." The crowd fell silent. The cameras kept rolling, but no one asked another question. Because sometimes the answer is bigger than any headline. I went back to the room and sat down again in my father's chair. I picked up his diary, the same one that had guided me from the beginning. On the last page I wrote in my firm handwriting, "Fear builds walls. Courage, foundations." I closed the diary, feeling the symbolic weight of that gesture. The story was complete. Not all justice comes with applause. Sometimes it arrives in the silence of the wind, in the firmness of the ground, and in the courage to remain where they said you didn't belong. That night I returned home, the house that started as leftovers and ended as roots. The gate still creaked when it opened, and the windows still let the wind in, but now everything sounded different. It was no longer loneliness. It was presence. It was as if the whole place was breathing with me. I turned on the hallway lights and walked to the office where it all began. The same smell of old wood, the same echo of the past. On the table, I left my father's diary open, next to the cassette tape and the rusty key he had left me. The key that had led me to the cellar, to the secret, to the truth. And, in the end, to my own freedom. I sat in the leather armchair, the same one he used to recline in to dictate orders and decisions. I looked at the reflection of my image in the window pane and smiled. There was no longer a shadow behind me, only the soft light of the lamp, shed on the face of a woman who had learned to wait for the right moment to speak. I took a blank sheet of paper and began to write, not a plan, but a letter. Father, you taught me the weight of silence, but I learned the power of breaking it. Everything your fear built, I transformed into a foundation. The company now has a different name, a different purpose, and, most importantly, a different owner, time. The time it took, the time it gave back. The wind still hits first, but now it's to announce what is alive. I folded the letter and placed it inside the diary, next to his words. The generations at last were meeting, not to compete but to forgive each other. Then I went down to the cellar. The stairs creaked, but each step felt firm, as if the house recognized me. The iron trapdoor was still there, now clean without rust. I touched the cold metal and felt a peace that was hard to explain. The true inheritance wasn't the land nor the company. It was this silent understanding that nothing is small when it is just. I went up and out into the garden. The wind blew again, lifting leaves, making the trees bow. And among them I saw something I had never noticed before. A small sprout growing at the base of the wall, exactly where the wind hit first. I stared at it for long minutes, smiling. So this is where it all begins again, I murmured. In the sky, the clouds parted and let the moon emerge, huge, white, illuminating the old roof of the house. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. That air smelled of a new beginning. I went back inside and made some tea. In the gentle warmth of the kitchen, I heard the distant sound of the news on TV. New president of Roots Incorporated announces reparation program and scholarships for young black women in the fields of engineering and architecture. My name was spoken with respect. Not with pity, nor with surprise, with weight. The weight of someone who had rebuilt with her own hands what they tried to erase. I felt a lump in my throat, but a smile overcame the tears. I opened the window and let the wind in. The same wind that had guided every step, that had shown me where to dig, where to wait, where to build. And it was looking at the horizon that I realized. The cycle was complete. I didn't need applause. The ground was already applauding me. If you understood this story, if you've ever had to rebuild your own foundation when everyone thought it was dust, remember, there is power in standing tall, even when the world tries to bury you. Subscribe to continue with me on this journey of resistance, justice, and rebirth. Because the wind still blows. And we are still here,